Out of the Park Baseball is actually an incredible game, especially when you start digging into it. And so there's no surprise that people online recommend OOTP over every other baseball sim. The truth that we old men have to accept is that the most interesting baseball simulation projects and studies these days all tend to use OOTP. And yet, the thing that fans of OOTP really need to appreciate is that OOTP is actually not like the best or the perfect baseball simulation that's out there. Actually, there are a lot of problems with OOTP that few people who are really into the game talk about or even acknowledge, and that's what I'm here to tell you about today. Behind the glitz of the 3D engine is a game that is deeply flawed and very frustrating. It might look nice, sure, but the graphics don't really look all that great if you look closely enough. And if you look closely enough during your fancy autoplay projects, you will realize that there are major issues with the statistical framework that you never thought were there. Anyway, without any further ado, here are 10 things that really drive me nuts about OOTP. Now, those of you who are longtime fans of the game will agree right away with at least some of these. Other points are going to end up being a little bit more controversial, but please at least hear me out first. Now, number 10 is one that I think we can all agree with, and it's not even really a part of the game itself. Number 10 on this list started with this post from OOTP founder Marcus Heinsohn way back in December 2022. It turns out that OOTP had been using Japanese professional baseball team names and information for years without having the proper license. Of course, this was no surprise to anybody who had been playing OOTP for decades. In fact, OOTP didn't have any professional licenses for years. So one of the dirty little secrets is the fact that those fancy OOTP databases, the Major League and Minor League databases, those were largely created by the users. OOTP is able to use historical databases because of its licensing deals, but it decided to use Japanese team names and the Japanese modern players and so on without bothering to get the official licenses, and it used these for years. As soon as there was a threat of a lawsuit, OOTP developments had to make a sudden change. And I mean, this change was really, really sudden. Anyway, OOTP's answer to its own mistake was to push across an aggressive modification in Steam that forcibly changed all the infringing Japanese data to South Africa. And this literally happened overnight, so players woke up finding that the Tokyo Giants had now suddenly turned into the Pretoria Bisons, though the player names were largely the same. The fact is that the change basically corrupted your save by design. There was no way around it, unless you somehow stopped the game from taking that latest update. And all of this happened with basically no forewarning. Now, if you were running a fictional Japanese league, that is a league with fictional team names and fictional league name, nothing happened to you. You didn't notice any of this. But anybody doing any serious real world projects was totally blindsided by the whole thing. That's not the worst of it though, right? I mean, going in and changing things for people is pretty bad. But no, the worst part is that the moderators on the official forum really went to town, shutting down any discussion about this topic as quickly as possible. Posts on the official forum became unreadable, with any mention of the three letters N, P, and B being forcibly removed. Speculative threads about whether OOTP really had the licenses it claimed to have were quickly shut down. People started talking about forming an alternative forum, and of course, any mention of anything like that was met with an instant ban with no hope at reinstatement. And for a few weeks, the OOTP subreddit was filled with posts by people asking how to undo the change. So as usual, right, the change itself was bad enough, yeah, but it was somewhat understandable. But refusing to allow OOTP players to even talk about what had just happened was just bizarre. As usual, the cover-up is worse than the crime. Censorship is still really strong in the official OOTP forums, and this includes anybody who is seen as too critical of the way that the game is designed. Sadly, that means the real problems with the game go largely unheard. Unless, of course, somebody there manages to find this video, in which case, hey, payday for me, right? Anyway, number 9 on this list is a problem that really drives me nuts since I haven't been able to find a suitable solution to it at all. Number 9 on this list is a problem that you will really only notice if you're trying to make OOTP content on YouTube. No matter what I do, the text size is always insanely small, so small that it's just not worth dealing with. And before you ask, I already have the game set to the maximum font size. So this is a major problem, right? OOTP, like it's got graphics, but it's really a text game. It's simply not fun to play if you have to squint to read the text, if you have like a 27-inch monitor like the majority of us have, unless you're on like an old laptop. Among all of the text-based sports sims that I've played, OOTP is the worst when it comes to font sizes on modern monitors. Football Manager 26 might be a steaming hunk of garbage, but at least you can read the text to find the AI vibe coding mistakes. Games like Replay Baseball display perfectly fine on my monitor, it's easy to read, and everything is set up right without me needing to edit things manually. It's really easy to change the size of the text in Diamond Mine Baseball to make it readable, even though the game has basically gone unchanged for the last 20 years. Even an ancient DOS game like Cactus Professional Basketball is still readable after all these years, and it's actually still as much fun to play today as when I was a kid. Meanwhile, in OOTP 26, I'm stuck squinting my eyes trying to figure out where the setting I'm looking for is, or trying to read the in-game email. So I get the feeling that OOTP was exclusively designed for laptops like 15 years ago or something like that, and that nobody really bothered to ever update the interface at all. It's awful, it makes it really bad to get good footage for videos like this one. Now I know what you're thinking, right? Come on man, stop making videos, right? What a stupid thing to complain about and all of that. Yeah, you know, I get it, but guess what? This is my video, I get to say what I want to say. Anyway, up next is an issue that a lot of OOTP fans likely do not agree with, but it becomes problematic when you compare it with what else is out there. As you already know, OOTP is a game that really is all about the front office aspects of baseball. I mean, the game of baseball is there, sure, but the fun parts of the game are centered around buying good players and getting your budget to balance right. The more you play OOTP, the more fascinated you will be with screens like this one. See, the problem with OOTP is not that it's unrealistic, rather it's that it is too realistic. In OOTP, you cannot break free of the modern world of Major League Baseball contracts. Now, the economic system is complex, sure, but it's severely hampered by these limitations. This is obvious when you compare OOTP to games like, say, Football Manager. While you can set all sorts of financial options, there are certain aspects of the financial system that can never be changed. Finances, for example, will always follow the modern Major League Baseball system of salary levels staying with the player as he moves from team to team. In contrast, when you play Football Manager, you can bring in players from all around the world on trial, and you negotiate a new contract with every new player that comes into your team. In other words, salary management in Football Manager requires you to pay attention to your transfer budget and your wage budget. In OOTP, you only have a single budget, and the way that cash on hand actually works is pretty confusing. And the other problem with OOTP's budgetary system is that it is not historically accurate. Now, I know that that might be a little bit shocking to hear it, but it is the truth, and I really am dead serious about this. OOTP would need to radically change its financial system if it was going to emulate the way that baseball actually worked in like 1920, for example. So for example, in this abandoned 1922 Boston Red Sox save, I was able to go at the beginning of the season and buy Lefty Grove from the Baltimore Orioles for basically nothing. In real life, Orioles owner Jack Dunn refused to allow Grove to go to the major leagues until he absolutely had to sell him, and then he sold him off to the highest bidder. The reality is that Grove cost Connie Mack over $100,000, something that you will never see happen in OOTP. So I know that OOTP has to simplify the financial system to some extent to make it so the game's playable, right? I understand that that's fine, but if you're going to put in a real-life minor league system, you have to give it real-life rules. Otherwise, you wind up with these bizarre circumstances that never would have happened in real life, and it really pisses off people like me who are historians, especially when we want to go back to the time when like Connie Mack would go around and find random Sandlot players to see if they could play in the major leagues. You can't do that in OOTP. I can do it in Football Manager, right? Maybe I'll just play that game instead. And this doesn't even count all of the many errors in the minor league database, or the fact that you've got, different teams and entire leagues that are missing for certain seasons and stuff like that. The whole thing is a mess. Anyway, we'll go to number 7, which is one I think we can all agree on. The options in OOTP are extremely confusing and are largely repetitive. It takes me forever to go through these at the start of every save, and even still I miss really important things. Now I know that it's fun to have a game with so many options, but seriously guys, this is overkill. Like, I get it, alright? I understand that they want to give you the option to do everything. But seriously, somebody needs to go through and actually fix the options. Some of these things are broken and others are duplicative. For instance, the reserve roster size rule doesn't really matter, and you can't do anything to get the computer to actually enforce it. The 1924 Red Sox are free to stack as many young players as they want, since you can't force them to stick to a 10-player reserve limit. There is an option on the Historical Settings tab to automatically adjust league strategy when you advance to the next season. But when you go to the Stats and AI tab, you will see the exact same option, and there's no clue as to which is the right one. Anyway, I could go on. The truth is that this game is a mess. I honestly think that the programming team behind OOTP has given up on trying to make any sense out of it all. OOTP is really in a prime position to be challenged by a serious competitor, though it's going to take us years to see a real challenger arrive. I know that some of you have told me all about Baseball Mogul. So I've talked a lot with the creator of Baseball Mogul. I've played the latest version of it. That game is a long way away from being a serious competitor with OOTP. Eventually, I'm going to create a video about that, talking about some of the many issues with Baseball Mogul, but it's not really even close. Seriously though, what I really wish OOTP would do is fix some of this stuff up to make this game a little bit more playable. Anyway, number 6 is the sound settings, which you apparently can't change until you're ready to start a game for some bizarre reason. Or you can always go to the ballpark editor where you can change some of the sounds. It doesn't make sense. This is a menu setup that looks like it was just slapped together. Anyway, the game will tell you how to name your sound files in order to get your custom sounds set up. And that all seems really simple, except that it's not simple. It's really not simple at all. In particular, the way that ambient sounds actually work in OOTP is a total mystery to me. The company has done an extremely poor job over the years trying to explain any of this to any of us. The official forums do a lot of the heavy lifting here too. For example, this post reminds you that the sounds have to be in OGG format, which the game doesn't tell you. Now you can set up and download a lot of your own sound files, but you'll realize after a while that the game really does a poor job of normalizing the sound volume. And a lot of these custom sound folders you can download might have good intentions, but the end products are actually really bad. Anyway, the whole sound system is really janky and it feels like a program from 20 years ago. There's got to be a better way to get sounds to work. Now, to OOTP's credit, its system works a lot better than what we get with Football Manager, where you have to edit miles of code just to customize your own sounds. But OOTP should at least put some effort into trying to update its sound system and getting rid of stupid things like that stupid chant that goes on, and stuff like that. If you play with the default sounds, it's awful. Anyway, point number 5 is going to be one that gets a lot of you upset with me. At first glance, OOTP's 3D graphics look pretty good, I guess. If you look really close though, you will realize that the rendering quality is really bad, especially for what is supposed to be a state-of-the-art game. It's also common for players to do bizarre things in the field. And the animations for things like errors and misplays are stock, and they never really seem to change. I mean, yeah, this would be a great system if we were still living in 2005, but I don't know about that. Go back and play some of the baseball games that were popular in 2005 and get back to me, right? I mean, this is a really, really outdated system, and it feels like they picked like the cheapest possible contractor to slap together some 3D graphics on short notice. And when you look closely at some of the graphics, you'll realize that whoever put this together doesn't know how baseball is actually played. Now, it only gets worse when you use custom stadiums. If you don't take the time beforehand to get rid of the bad camera angles in user-designed stadiums, you will wind up with something that is really unwatchable. And I put the blame on the camera system in general, which is uniquely awful. Part of the problem here is that the user has too much freedom with the 3D camera, which leads to camera angles that simply don't work. So you can see the reason why those 3D camera angles are a real problem when you compare OOTP with similar games, especially with Football Manager. Football Manager wins in this category in large part because there are only a few fixed camera angles you can choose from, not this unlimited number of options. And as you can clearly see here, Football Manager has much better sprite rendering. It's not perfect, of course, but it's a lot better than OOTP. In OOTP, I can't tell what's going on half the time unless I go in ahead of time and delete all the camera angles that just don't work. So I mean, it's not a huge pain for everyone, I guess, but it really sucks if you're trying to like quickly get footage for a YouTube video. You can tell I've got a bias in this list, right? Anyway, number 4 on this list is really similar and should really be paired together with number 5, but I had to come up with 10, right? But this one really pisses me off because I tried to use it and it just didn't work. With 3D graphics as frustrating as these, you would figure that the 2D graphics would work better, right? Well, I gave this a try, but look, all of the players are lined up wrong. And it doesn't matter which 2D mode I use. Now, if you want to configure the game screen, you have to manually put in the X and Y coordinates for every single piece of the game. I mean, come on guys, that's simply unacceptable. I mean, there's no reason a game in 2026 should be set up like that. I don't know how you guys can play with this stuff, right? I gave up on it right away. Anyway, I was able to play a little bit with a game like this, but I mean, come on. Action PC Baseball has its own problems, but at least you can get the display looking like this, which is acceptable. And it will be even more infuriating when you realize that Football Manager 17 had 2D graphics that looked like this. This is 1,000 times better than OOTP. And why is it that a Famicom baseball game from almost 40 years ago looks better than the current version of OOTP? So I know that the team tries hard, right? But I do think that when it comes to the 2D graphics, they could try a little bit harder. Give me a game with like the backing of OOTP, but a graphical engine from like RBI Baseball, and I would be happy for life, right? You don't even need to customize the stadiums. Anyway, the top 3 on this list are more major issues in my opinion. Now, I think that each one of these 3 problems basically breaks the game if you want to do any like serious project with it. Number 3 on this list is the Major League Equivalency System, which is just simply broken. I mean, it works fine enough with actual MLB players, but is broken for everybody else. For example, when you import Sadaharu O, he will be worse than a marginal player unless you manually edit him. O's problem is that OOTP's internal Major League Equivalency System really comes down on players who never played in the major leagues in real life. The worst part about this is that this is the system that you simply cannot change. You can't change it, doesn't matter what you do. You got all these settings, you can change like the inflation rate, you can like, I don't know, make it so that like the arbitration period, only starts after like, I don't know, like 7 years or something like that. You can do all sorts of like crazy things in this game that never happened in real life, but you can never touch anything having to do with the Major League Equivalent system, right? That would be awful, right? Why would we let people do anything like that? The only way you can work around the system is to manually edit the players yourself. That's a hassle and it takes a lot of time. Now, if OOTP were to actually open up its system, the community could likely fix this. But of course, it's 2026. We can't have open engines anymore, right? And I'm really frustrated about this. The way to fix this is to go into the editor by yourself and just give him better batting stats. This is a trial and error thing, and it can be really frustrating after a while. And even after the changes, O only managed to play until age 33 in my project, managing a mere 147 home runs. Now, it didn't help that he suffered multiple internal injuries after a farm equipment incident. Maybe he should have taken up a safer hobby than farming, something like water skiing or cliff diving. Anyway, in all seriousness, like the bizarre reason for the end of his career is actually pretty cool. But the fact that I had to change him by hand at the beginning to get him to work right, that really sucks. OOTP really should fix this, and I'm not happy with the way things are. Number 2, meanwhile, is something that I've kind of talked about a little bit before, and this one really does piss me off. Number 2 on my list is random debut, or rather the way that random debut is actually set up. Now, random debut mode is actually really cool, and the coolest part is how easy it is to get this set up. You should know, however, that the whole thing is really buggy and kind of strange. So the idea behind random debut is that you have like this pool of players from all of Major League Baseball history who will enter the major leagues at random. It's kind of a fun idea until you realize that you can only get players to enter the major leagues at the very year that they entered the majors in real life. And in my experience, this mode is also extremely buggy. For example, I wanted to have my historical league settings set to 1964 so that I didn't have to play with deadball era settings. I then tried to change the starting year to 1901. As a result, I got a game that started in 1964 with multiple players who wouldn't be born for decades. And I mean, I don't even know what to say about this. Anyway, you can't do it the way that I want to do it. You got to start your league first in like 1901 and then change the statistical settings to what you want, or you start in 1964 and change the statistical settings, or like whatever, I don't know. It just doesn't work the way that you would think it would work, and there's nothing you can do about it because the game has a mind of its own. Anyway, you'll get some players who come in at random older ages. You can go in after the fact and make them younger, though you do have to actually do this by hand. The biggest problem, however, is that you can't get players to come in at the right young age. So if you're playing OOTP with the minor leagues turned on, you don't want players to come in at age like 25 or whatever. No, you want them to come in at like 17 or 18, and you want them to be part of the big draft and stuff like that, right? That's the ideal, because then you take like whoever it is, Ken Griffey Jr., and you stick him in the minor leagues, or maybe you don't, like in real life, whatever, and there you can mold the guy into the player you want him to become, right? That's the whole idea behind this, but you just can't do this with the way that OOTP is set up, and you cannot change the database to make it work. You have to play it the way that it's set up by default, or you don't play it at all. Now, in the old days, it used to be that you could change the database around to make this stuff work. This was back in the days when OOTP was much more open to database modifications. Beloved forum member Spritz, who sadly passed away a few years ago, worked really hard to create a historical high school database for this very purpose. Unfortunately, the Spritz database doesn't work well with later versions of the game, and somebody on the forums eventually discovered that it was missing important fielding data, making it basically worthless. And people on the forums still ask about it today, only to be met with some of the most tasteless replies that I've ever seen on any message board. So yeah, I've alluded to this before. I'll just come out and say it. The official OOTP forum is toxic. It's been toxic for years now, and it only got worse with the NPB debacle because a lot of really good posters ended up leaving in disgust, right? It's not a great place to be. Anyway, I do think the community could put together a really similar database if OOTP would open things up again for database editing, but that ship apparently sailed over a decade ago and nobody will get it back. If you talk about this in the official forum, people will make really sarcastic or disgusting jokes like we just saw. Anyway, random debut as it stands right now is not bad, but you can't play it without thinking about how much better it would be if it were just a little bit more flexible. But in any case, the number one thing that really drives me nuts is a problem that most of you likely don't know about, and it's going to blow your mind when you realize what's really happening here. I set up a project not long ago starting in 1920, but I wanted to import some of the best home run hitters in the history of the game. The idea behind this project was to get as much offense as I possibly could into the 1920s, largely to see what impact this would have on the game as a whole. However, when I started to perform the automatic replay, I noticed that home runs were unusually low. And this problem just went on. It continued for several seasons. In the end, I had to abandon the project. I was puzzled by this, couldn't figure out what was going on. Eventually, I did a couple of searches to try to figure out what was happening. And well, this is a fundamental flaw with OOTP that honestly, I do not think can be solved. So it turns out that somebody else had a similar problem with Babe Ruth in 1920. This is a post from a 2024 OOTP topic, so it's pretty new. As you can see here, Babe Ruth only hit 29 home runs in this 1920 replay. That's the same total he hit in 1919. And as you can see here on the other side, the player put Oscar Charleston into his project, which sounds like a lot of fun, to be honest with you. Anyway, the reply from all of the know-it-alls on the toxic forum is enough to piss anybody off. Look, anybody who knows anything about the history of the sport and how the baseball replay community actually works would see this sort of result as just unacceptable, right? It's an indication that something fundamentally is wrong with this game. Unless, of course, you're an OOTP fanboy, in which case the problem, as always, is with the user. So the answer here is that there are not many home runs to go around in the league as a whole, and Babe Ruth took up a big percentage of them in real life. And because of the ridiculous way that OOTP does these calculations, bringing in any minor league player who could hit home runs would then reduce the number that Ruth would hit, since the game allocates home runs according to the players currently in the league and the league totals. So this is all governed by these league total modifier settings, which is why I call this problem the LTM problem. All right, so let's back up a second, right? So for most baseball fans, you think of baseball player ability as being connected and defined by their statistical output. However, in OOTP, things work a little bit differently, right? Part of the problem is that you have the system where players who never played in the majors in real life could theoretically move up to play in the majors in the game. So to govern things and to stop the statistics from getting way out of control, the programmers decided to create this concept of the league total modifier, which serves as a sort of soft lock on league statistics. So in other words, when you're looking at batting statistics, you will end up with a quota of an approximate number of doubles, triples, and home runs that can happen in the league. You think of it as like a big pie, and then all of the sluggers are given certain pieces of the pie, like, in connection with like their power ratings as they compare with each other. So like if you use this Junior Gilliam card from the reprinted 1955 APA set, he will hit just about the same average and number of extra base hits regardless of the year or league that you put him in. Now we could argue that this 1975 Pete Rose Stratomatic baseball card is more accurate, since Pete's production will depend in part on the pitching that he faces. Pitching and fielding get 50% of the results in Strat, of course. A game like Replay works similarly, though the split is not quite 50-50. Nolan Ryan's 1986 card will always get a lot of strikeouts even when he's part of cross-era play, for example. Now, the truth is that no matter what game it is that you have, if you want to come up with meaningful results in a cross-era environment, you need to do some sort of what we call normalization, right? What that means is that you take the statistics from the year that the player did the thing, and then you sort of strip away the era that he did that in to sort of a neutral era. This is what Baseball Reference does. Then you can take those neutral statistics and apply them to a different era, right? The best person to talk to about this is Bill Staffa with Skatersoft, who unfortunately doesn't get a whole lot of respect or attention. He's the one who understands this thing, I think, better than anybody else, right? Now, these games, they don't worry about then restricting the player further to keep the overall league totals at a certain level, right? OTP is the only game where I've ever seen that happen, right? Because naturally, you would think that if you took like Barry Bonds and you stuck him into 1920, that you would see more home runs than the league in general because it's Barry Bonds, right? You wouldn't then say, oh, well, Babe Ruth has to have fewer home runs so Barry Bonds can get his home runs, right? That makes no sense, right? That's the way that OOTP works. To my knowledge, OOTP is the only baseball game that forces itself to stick to the league totals no matter what, and this isn't even well advertised. So the people who know about this problem tend to get really upset about it, like this guy on the OOTP subreddit who wrote a long essay that nobody has actually read. This guy's argument is really confusing, but I think the gist of it is that OOTP's engine could be changed to be adjusted for the sudden influx of new and talented players to avoid the exact problem that I just described. At any rate, in my opinion, this post right here describes the problem perfectly. OOTP is set up so that the league will play like 1986 if you set the league totals to 1986, regardless of the talent levels of the players involved. And the explanation on the OOTP wiki is extremely confusing and doesn't really touch on the exact issue that I just described, which anybody doing a creative OOTP historical project will encounter right away. So I did this project a few years back where I stuck Barry Bonds into the dead ball era. I was disappointed he didn't dominate the way that I thought that he might. So now that I know about this thing, I realized that the problem was that his offensive statistics were depressed because he had to split the league total numbers of doubles, triples, and home runs with every other great hitter in the league. I mean, there's no way for me to adequately describe just how backwards this is and how little sense that it makes, right? The sport of baseball fundamentally is not a sport where there is only so many home runs you can hit in a certain season, and so those are God comes and dishes them out this many to this guy and that many to that guy, right? It's not a sport where there's a finite number of extra base hits that we can't exceed, or else the apocalypse comes and it's the four horsemen or whatever, right? No, it doesn't work like that. Anyway, if you want a game that has a good cross-era play system, you need to play Diamond Mine Baseball. It's the game that is the industry standard for this. and has been now for decades. If you're trying to do something like this, like seriously trying to do it, stay far, far away from OOTP. OOTP will work better if you have like a what if like challenge or whatever within a certain season. But if you start like taking tons of players from like 1991 and sticking them in 1901, you're going to get results that are just totally bizarre, and you're going to wish that you never did it in the first place. Anyway, that's it for my long OOTP rant, and I thank each of you for coming to my TED Talk. In all seriousness though, OOTP is actually a lot of fun, and I will certainly do more of these projects despite all of my complaints about the game. However, before you start your serious project with OOTP, you need to be fully aware of the problems and limitations with the game itself. Anyway, to be honest with you guys, I really think that OOTP is better suited for fictional teams and fictional players, right? Random debut is okay, but you have to be really careful. Like the 19th century players wind up being way overrated. This is because of the way that the LTMs work. This is also because they get super statistics because the really good players were better than the rest of the league. This is all in part because the people who made OOTP never really read Bill James and don't understand that the talent disparity in Major League Baseball has sort of come closer as time has gone on, right? If you're going to do this sort of system, you have to take that into consideration. People who have studied this over the years and who have seriously played a lot of these replay games understand how this works. OOTP's programming team doesn't, never has, and likely never will. I still think that OOTP is great for quick projects, but I'm certainly not going to give up Replay, Diamond Mine Baseball, Stratomatic, APA, and these other games because they do it better than OOTP does it. But you will see more OOTP projects from me in the future because there's still a bunch of little things I want to mess around with and little experiments I want to do and so on. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down below, and I'll probably end up fighting with you as usual. So I'll talk with you in the comments. Bye.